When I was a kid, my mum used to pick me and my sister up from school, and on special occasions, she would let us get an ice cream. However, we'd get into the shop, right, and my sister, who was quite sure of herself, would say, "That's the ice cream I'm getting." She'd pick it out and have a great afternoon. I, on the other hand, would stare at these 20 different options and cry. Looking back, I think what was going on was I knew that picking one meant forfeiting 19. Statistically, I only had a 5% chance of being perfect. And that is what I want to talk about today in this video. Perfectionism. I've noticed that perfectionism does show up in a lot of contexts for me. So it shows up in, say, this sort of context. I'm like, well, if I can't make this video perfectly, why should I make it at all? It shows up in social situations. Last week, I said something dumb at a dinner party, and I woke up and just messaged my friend, and I was like, man, I'm so sorry for when I said that thing. And she's like, dude, what are you talking about? I was like, oh. And I get it with sobriety. For years, I found it was really, really hard to quit drugs because I would go, say, 5 days without them, and then I would mess up on a Friday and I'd be like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, and then just have a bender. Instead of gradual sobriety, I wanted that perfect streak, which is so damn dangerous. So that's what this video is about, perfectionism and also procrastination, because I believe that those two things are inherently linked. All right. Let's start with a definition. This one is from Brené Brown, the world's mother. Perfectionism is not the same thing as striving to be your best. Perfectionism is the belief that if we live perfect, look perfect, and act perfect, we can minimize or avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. It's a shield. It's a 20-ton shield that we lug around thinking it will protect us, when in fact, it's the thing that's really preventing us from flight. In short, perfectionism is not the way, it's in the way. Whoa. I identify perfectionism in myself in 3 areas: before a task, during the task, and after the task. So let's say you have a blank page. This is before the task. At the moment, this is pristine and perfect, and whatever you've got in your head is also perfect. Problem is, you need to get the perfect idea from your head onto this perfectly blank, pristine page. And the second that you mark this thing with a pen is the second that this page and the idea stop being perfect. Rather than destroy my perfect idea with a line, it's a lot more comforting to just not start. This fear of tainting a page and an idea in one move is also where I think my procrastination comes from. During a project, I noticed that I don't usually want to continue it because even though I know I should trust the process, I don't. Sometimes I'll find myself 1 hour in with 8 hours to go of a project, and what I'm working on just looks ugly because it's unfinished, and that's just the nature of unfinished work. If my desire to be perfect is particularly high, I tend to abandon that project and start a new one, untainted by my imperfect executions. And finally, after, when the project is finished. If I do happen to make it to the end of a project, something always happens, and that is when I evaluate that project, all I can see are the flaws. These tiers are longer than those tiers. This yellow is kind of a bit too orange for me. I don't really like how I've drawn that mouth, and I can just see smudges here. Also, this circle doesn't link up, and it's just hard to be happy with whatever you've made. I liken it to wearing a white shirt and then you're eating chips and you spill tomato sauce down the front. Even though 99% of that shirt is still clean, your eyes cannot help but look at that big saucy stain. So given that this force is having a negative impact on my life, it makes sense that I've tried to overcome it. The absolute best way to solve this problem is to unpack your whole childhood and understand that your worth is not defined by what you accomplish and how well you accomplish it. You know, be vulnerable and honest and open, and understand that perfectionism comes from shame. But doing this ironically looks really daunting, especially to perfectionists. And it doesn't look like a switch that I can just flip. In the meantime, I've come up with a habit forming tool which can supplement the wider emotional journey. I call it the 70% rule. In short, it looks like this. Aim for 70%, not 100%. This sounds really basic, but I'll explain. When I go to make a video like this, sometimes I'll ask before I make it, can I make it perfectly? And the answer is always going to be no. But if I say, can I make it to at least 70% of perfect? The answer is usually yes, which means I should make it. I don't know, let me know. If you're trying to quit drinking, for example, and one night you fall off the wagon and get horribly drunk, instead of remaining off the wagon because you've killed your perfect streak, look at a long enough time period and say, hey, was I sober for at least 70% of my days? If so, I'm making progress. If it comes down to picking 1 out of 20 ice creams when I was a child, I know that 6 out of 10 of them will statistically be better than 70%. And am I able to pick something that I know would be in my top 6? Yeah, a lot more than if I was to pick my top 1. So that's the trick. Be content with anything above 70%. But holy hell, man, how do you do that? How do you actually implement that into your life? The best way that I've found is repetition and reward. So anytime that I find myself beating myself up for something not being perfect, I have to interrupt that thought pattern then and there by saying, was it better than 70%? And if the answer is yes, I have to respond with, nice, you won. And I know that sounds corny as hell, but it's usually enough to interrupt the pattern. And if you interrupt the pattern enough times, then you start to develop a new pattern. So that's how I implement it, just constantly reminding myself to do it. There's probably a more efficient way, but I haven't found it yet. All right, so that's the 70% rule, but why does it work? The 70% rule works for 4 reasons. It lowers the barrier to entry, the law of diminishing returns, it helps you finish, and it reinforces the truth. 1, it lowers the barrier to entry. Oh my goodness, I cannot tell you how annoyed I am by the fact that usually the problem with starting so many projects is just starting, is actually just starting. That always seems to be the problem. I hate how simple it sounds, I really do. I mean, let's just take the gym for example. If you're slumped on the couch and the thought that you're having in your head is, can I do the single greatest workout of all time? The answer's gonna be no. But if your question is, can I do a pretty good workout? Could I go just slightly above mild at the gym today? The answer's usually yeah. Yeah, I could. And at that point, you tend to run out of excuses. 2, the law of diminishing returns. Let me grab some graphs. This is the law of diminishing returns. We've got time on the x-axis and output on the y-axis. So this is the amount of time that you spend on a particular project, and this is how good the project is. So let's say this is 1 day, 2 day, 3 days. 1 day, yeah, we're just starting to get it done. On day 2, we've got it done slightly better, but it takes us just as much time to get that extra little percent. And the reason that the people in this third column suffer isn't necessarily because they make the product worse with polishing, it's just because they deplete all their time. So let's say we measure 3 people across a week. Somebody does 7 1-day projects, somebody does 3.5 2-day projects, and somebody does 2 3-day projects. We'll call them the imperfectionist, the perfectionist, and the hyper-perfectionist. The imperfectionist makes 7 things that are pretty good. The perfectionist makes 3.5 things which are really good, and the hyper-perfectionist makes 2 things which are incredible. Now at this point you're thinking, man, just be day 3, like that person's making incredible work. But there is one more twist. Every time you execute and finish a project, you get better at making projects. And that is because of the feedback loop that people give you, and also the feedback loop that you're giving yourself as somebody who finishes projects. So the person who's made 7 things in a week, their potential is actually getting larger. And what you'll find is that 70% of a really big pie is better than 95% of a just okay pie. There's a story I've heard to support those graphs, which is there was a photography professor who had a class and he divided it into 2. Then he gave one half the assignment. He said, you're gonna take 1 photo, but make it the greatest photo you've ever taken. And he said to the second group, your assignment is to take as many photos as possible. At the end of the semester, a group of judges picked out the greatest photos. And it turns out that the best photos that they had selected were from the quantity group, not the quality. 3, it helps you finish. I'm gonna say this real slow. Your body of work is only as good as the projects you finish. I hate that that's true, but it is true. And sometimes finishing something is really, really hard because you look at it and you say, oh, I can just tweak this slightly. And the second that you hit upload, you're like, man, I can tweak 10 more things. But the question we shouldn't ask is, what's wrong with this? Is this greater than 70%? And if it is, just exhale. And 4, it reinforces the truth. The truth that we're reinforcing here is you are not defined by what you can accomplish or produce. And the more that we do make stuff at 70%, the more we realize that the world doesn't hate us at all for making something imperfect, which would sound wacky to somebody who isn't a perfectionist. But if you are, I'm sure that resonates. Basically, the more that you make stuff at 70%, the more you realize that your work is not your worth. So that's why it works, and I'm gonna leave you with 2 final thoughts. The first is, once you've hit 70% on a project, feel free to keep polishing and making it 85 or 90, but at some point you've got to get out. And the second thought is, your number might be totally different. You're looking for a number that lowers the barrier to entry and makes you just start something, and can also help you finish. So whatever number seems to help you, that's the right one. Before I end this video, I'm going to leave you with a quote from Anne Lamott. I think perfectionism is based on the obsessive belief that if you run carefully enough, hitting each stepping stone just right, you won't have to die. The truth is that you will die anyway, and a lot of people who aren't even looking at their feet are going to do a whole lot better than you and have a whole lot more fun while they're doing it. Brutal, but very true words. Anyway, I hope that this video brought you some sort of value. I hope that you learned something. Let me know if you did, or let me know if you've got some other tips on how you overcome perfectionism and procrastination. I'm going to leave in that starter because I think it is relevant. Subscribe if you're new, leave a comment if that's your thing, and share it if you think that a friend would like to see this. Other than that, it's all from me. Catch ya.